The Case for Animal Rights by Tom Regan, 1985, from In Defense of Animals, edited by Peter Singer. I regard myself as an advocate of animal rights, as a part of the animal rights movement. That movement, as I conceive it, is committed to a number of goals, including the total abolition of the use of animals in science, the total dissolution of commercial animal agriculture, and the total elimination of commercial and sport hunting and trapping. There are, I know, people who profess to believe in animal rights but do not avow these goals. Factory farming, they say, is wrong, it violates animals' rights, but traditional animal agriculture is alright. Toxicity tests of cosmetics on animals violates their rights, but important medical research, cancer research for example, does not. The clubbing of baby seals is abhorrent, but not the harvesting of adult seals. I used to think I understood this reasoning, not anymore. You don't change unjust institutions by tidying them up. What's wrong, fundamentally wrong, with the way animals are treated isn't the details that vary from case to case, it's the whole system. The forlornness of the veal calf is pathetic, heart-wrenching. The pulsing pain of the chimp with electrodes planted deep in her brain is repulsive. The slow torturous death of the raccoon caught in the leg hole trap is agonising. But what is wrong isn't the pain, isn't the suffering, isn't the deprivation. These compound what's wrong, sometimes, often, they make it much, much worse, but they are not the fundamental wrong. The fundamental wrong is the system that allows us to view animals as our resources, here for us, to be eaten, or surgically manipulated, or exploited for sport or money. Once we accept this view of animals as our resources, the rest is as predictable as it is regrettable. Why worry about their loneliness, their pain, their death? Since animals exist to benefit us in one way or another, what harms them really doesn't matter, or matters only if it starts to bother us, makes us feel a trifle uneasy when we eat our veal escallop, for example. So yes, let us get veal calves out of solitary confinement, give them more space, a little straw, a few companions, but let us keep our veal escallop. But a little straw, more space, and few companions won't eliminate, won't even touch, the basic wrong that attaches our viewing and treating these animals as our resources. A veal calf killed to be eaten after living in close confinement is viewed and treated in this way, but so too is another who is raised, as they say, more humanely. To right the wrong of our treatment of farm animals requires more than making rearing methods more humane. It requires the total dissolution of commercial animal agriculture. How we do this, whether we do it, or as in the case of animals in science, whether and how we abolish their use, these are to a large extent political questions. People must change their beliefs before they change their habits. Enough people, especially those elected to public office, must believe in change, must want it, before we have laws that protect the rights of animals. This process of change is very complicated, very demanding, very exhausting, calling for the efforts of many hands in education, publicity, political organisation and activity, down to the licking of envelopes and stamps. As a trained and practising philosopher, the sort of contribution I can make is limited, but, I like to think, important. The currency of philosophy is ideas, their meaning and rational foundation, not the nuts and bolts of the legislative process, say, or the mechanics of community organisation. That's what I have been exploring over the past 10 years or so in my essays and talks, and most recently in my book, The Case for Animal Rights. I believe the major conclusions I reach in the book are true, because they are supported by the weight of the best arguments. I believe the idea of animal rights has reason, not just emotion, on its side. In the space I have at my disposal here, I can only sketch, in the barest outline, some of the main features of the book. Its main themes, and we should not be surprised by this, involve asking and answering deep, foundational moral questions about what morality is, how it should be understood, and what is the best moral theory, all considered. I hope I can convey something of the shape I think this theory takes. The attempt to do this will be, to use a word a friendly critic once used to describe my work, cerebral. Perhaps too cerebral, but this is misleading. My feelings about how animals are sometimes treated run just as deep and just as strong as those of my more volatile compatriots. Philosophers do, to use the jargon of the day, have a right side to their brains. If it's the left side we contribute, or mainly should, that's because what talents we have reside there. How to proceed? We begin by asking how the moral status of animals has been understood by thinkers who deny that animals have rights. Then we test the mettle of their ideas by seeing how well they stand up under the heat of fair criticism. If we start our thinking in this way, we soon find that some people believe that we have no duties directly to animals, that we owe nothing to them, that we can do nothing that wrongs them. Rather, we can do wrong acts that involve animals, and we have duties regarding them, though none to them. Such views may be called indirect duty views. By the way of illustration, suppose your neighbour kicks your dog. Then your neighbour has done something wrong, but not to your dog. The wrong that has been done is a wrong to you. After all, it is wrong to upset people, and your neighbour's kicking your dog upsets you. So are you the one who is wronged, not your dog? Or again, by kicking your dog, your neighbour damages your property, and since it is wrong to damage another person's property, your neighbour has done something wrong, to you, of course, not to your dog. Your neighbour has no more wronged your dog than your car would be wronged if the windshield was smashed. Your neighbour's duties involving your dog are indirect duties to you. More generally, all of our duties regarding animals are indirect duties to one another, to humanity. How could someone try to justify such a view? Someone might say that your dog doesn't feel anything, and so isn't hurt by your neighbour's kick, doesn't care about the pain, since none of it is felt, is as unaware of anything as is your windshield. Someone might say this, but no rational person will, since among other considerations, such a view will commit anyone who holds it to the position that no human being feels pain either, that human beings also don't care about what happens to them. A second possibility is that though both humans and your dog are hurt when kicked, it is only human pain that matters. But again, no rational person can believe this. Pain is pain, wherever it occurs. If your neighbour's causing you pain is wrong because of the pain that is caused, we cannot rationally ignore or dismiss the moral relevance of the pain that your dog feels. Philosophers who hold indirect duty views, and many still do, have come to understand that they must avoid the two defeats just noted. That is, both the view that animals don't feel anything as well as the idea that only human pain can be morally relevant. Among such thinkers, the sort of view now favoured is one or another form of what is called contractarianism. Here, very crudely, is the root idea. Morality consists of a set of rules that individuals voluntarily agree to abide by, as we do when we sign a contract, hence the name contractarianism. Those who understand and accept the terms of the contract are covered directly. They have rights created and recognised by and protected in the contract, and these contractors can also have protection spelled out for others who, though they lack the ability to understand morality and so cannot sign the contract themselves, are loved or cherished by those who can. Thus young children, for example, are unable to sign contracts and lack rights, but they are protected by the contract nonetheless because of the sentimental interests of others, most notably their parents. So we have then duties involving these children, duties regarding them, but no duties to them. Our duties in their case are indirect duties to other human beings, usually their parents. As for animals, since they cannot understand contracts, they obviously cannot sign, and since they cannot sign, they have no rights. Like children, however, some animals are the objects of sentimental interest of others. You, for example, love your dog or cat. So those animals that enough people care about, companion animals, whales, baby seals, the American bald eagle, though they lack rights themselves, will be protected because of the sentimental interests of people. I have then, according to contractarianism, no duty directly to your dog or any other animal, not even the duty not to cause them pain or suffering. My duty not to hurt them is a duty I have to those people who care about what happens to them. As for other animals, where no or little sentimental interest is present, in the case of farm animals for example, or laboratory rats, what duties we have grow weaker and weaker, perhaps to vanishing point. The pain and death they endure, though real, are not wrong if no one cares about them. When it comes to the moral status of animals, contractarianism could be a hard view to refute if it were an adequate theoretical approach to the moral status of human beings. It is not adequate in this latter respect, however, which makes the question of its adequacy in the former case regarding animals utterly moot. For consider morality, according to the crude contractarian position before us, consists of rules that people agree to abide by. What people? Well, enough to make a difference. Enough, that is, collectively to have the power to enforce the rules that are drawn up in the contract. That is very well and good for the signatories, but not so good for anyone who was not asked to sign. And there is nothing in contractarianism of the sort we are discussing that guarantees or requires that everyone will have a chance to participate equally in framing the rules of morality. The result is that this approach to ethics could sanction the most blatant forms of social, economic, moral and political injustice, ranging from a repressive caste system to the systematic racial and sexual discrimination. Might, according to this theory, does not make it right. Let those who are the victims of injustice suffer as they will, it matters not, as long as no one else, no contractor, or too few of them, cares about it. Such a theory takes one's moral breath away, as if, for example, there would be nothing wrong with apartheid in South Africa if few white South Africans were upset by it. A theory with so little to recommend it at the level of ethics of our treatment of our fellow humans cannot have anything more to recommend it when it comes to the ethics of how we treat our fellow animals. The version of contractarianism just examined is, as I have noted, a crude variety, and in fairness to those of contractarian persuasion, it must be noted that much more refined, subtle and ingenious varieties are possible. For example, John Rawls in his A Theory of Justice sets forth a version of contractarianism that forces contractors to ignore the accidental features of being a human being. For example, whether one is white or black, male or female, a genius or of modest intellect. Only by ignoring such features, Rawls believes, can we ensure that the principles of justice that contractors would agree upon are not based on bias or prejudice. Despite the improvement of a view such as Rawls represents over the cruder forms of contractarianism, it remains deficient. It systematically denies that we have direct duties to those human beings who do not have a sense of justice, young children for instance, and many humans with mental illness, and yet it seems reasonably certain that we were to torture a young child or an enabled elder, we would be doing something that wronged him or her, not something that would be wrong if, only if, other humans with a sense of justice were upset. And since this is true in the case of these humans, we cannot rationally deny the same in the case of animals. Indirect duty views then, including the best among them, fail to command our rational assent. Whatever ethical theory we should accept rationally, therefore it must at least recognise that we have some duties directly to animals, just as we have some duties directly to each other. The next two theories I'll sketch attempt to meet this requirement. The first I call the cruelty-kindness view. Simply stated, this says that we have a direct duty to be kind to animals and a direct duty not to be cruel to them. Despite the familiar, reassuring ring of these ideas, I do not believe that this view offers an inadequate theory. To make this clearer, consider kindness. A kind person acts from a certain kind of motif, compassion or concern for example, and that is a virtue. But there is no guarantee that a kind act is a right act, and if I am a generous racist for example, I will be inclined to act kindly towards members of my own race, favouring their interests above those of others. My kindness would be real, and so far as it goes, good, but I trust it is too obvious to require argument that my kind acts may not be above moral reproach, may, in fact, be positively wrong, because rooted in injustice. So kindness, notwithstanding its status as a virtue to be encouraged, simply will not carry the weight of a theory of right action. Cruelty fares no better. People or their acts are cruel if they display either a lack of sympathy for, or worse, the presence of enjoyment in another's suffering. Cruelty in all its guises is a bad thing, a tragic human failing, but just as a person's being motivated by kindness does not guarantee that he or she does what is right, so the absence of cruelty does not ensure that he or she avoids doing what is wrong. Many people who perform abortions, for example, are not cruel, sadistic people, but that fact alone does not settle the terribly difficult question of the morality of abortion. The case is no different when we examine the ethics of our treatment of animals. So yes, let us be for kindness and against cruelty, but let us not suppose that being for one and against the other answers questions about moral right and wrong. Some people think that the theory we are looking for is utilitarianism. A utilitarian accepts two moral principles. The first is that of equality. Everyone's interests count, and similar interests must be counted as having similar weight or importance. White or black, American or Iranian, human or animal, everyone's pains or frustration matter, and matter just as much as the equivalent pain or frustration of anyone else. The second principle a utilitarian accepts is that of utility. Do the act that will bring about the best balance between satisfaction and frustration for everyone affected by the outcome. As a utilitarian then, here is how I am to approach the task of deciding what I morally ought to do. I must ask, who will be affected if I choose to do one thing rather than another? How much each individual will be affected, and where the best results are most likely to lie? Which option, in other words, is most likely to bring about the best results, the best balance between satisfaction and frustration? That option, whatever it may be, is the one I ought to choose. That is where my moral duty lies. The great appeal of utilitarian rests within its uncompromising egalitarianism. Everyone's interests count, and count as much as the like interests of everyone else. The kind of odious discrimination that some forms of contractarianism can justify, discrimination based on race or sex for example, seems disallowed in principle by utilitarianism, as in speciesism, systematic discrimination based on species membership. The equality we find in utilitarianism, however, is not the sort an advocate of animal or human rights should have in mind. Utilitarianism has no room for the equal moral rights of different individuals, because it has no room for their equal inherent value or worth. What has value for the utilitarian is the satisfaction of an individual's interests, not the individual whose interest they are. A universe in which you satisfy your desire for water, food and warmth is, other things being equal, better than a universe in which these desires are frustrated, and the same is true in the case of an animal with similar desires, but neither you nor the animal have any value in your own right, only your feelings do. Here is an analogy to help make the philosophical point clearer. A cup contains two different liquids, sometimes sweet, sometimes bitter, sometimes a mix of the two. What has value are the liquids. The sweeter the better, the bitterer the worse. The cup, the container, has no value. It is what goes into it, not what they go into, that has value. For the utilitarian, you and I are like the cup. We have no value as individuals, and thus no equal value. What has value is what goes into us, what we serve as receptacles for. Our feelings of satisfaction have positive value, our feelings of frustration negative value. Serious problems arise for utilitarianism when we remind ourselves that it enjoins us to bring about the best consequences. What does this mean? It doesn't mean the best consequences for me alone, or for my family or friends, or any other person taken individually. No, what we must do is roughly as follows. We must add up somehow the separate satisfactions and frustrations of everyone likely to be affected by our choice. The satisfactions in one column, and the frustrations in another. We must total each column for each of the options before us. That is what it means to say the theory is aggregative, and then we must choose that option which is most likely to bring the best balance of total satisfactions over totaled frustrations. Whatever act would lead to this outcome is the one we ought morally to perform. It is where our moral duty lies. And that act quite clearly might not be the same one that would bring about the best results for me personally, or for my family or friends, or for a lab animal. The best aggregated consequences for everyone concerned are not necessarily the best for each individual. The utilitarianism is an aggregative theory. Different individuals' satisfactions or frustrations are added, or summed, or totaled, is the key objection to this theory. My Aunt B is an old, inactive, a cranky, sour person. Though not physically ill, she prefers to go on living. She is also rather rich. I could make a fortune if I could get my hands on her money she intends to give me in any event after she dies, but which she refuses to give me now. In order to avoid a huge tax bite, I plan to donate a handsome sum of my profits to a local children's hospital. Many children will benefit from my generosity, and much joy will be brought to their parents, relatives and friends. If I don't get the money rather soon, all these ambitions will come to naught. The once-in-a-lifetime's opportunity to make a real killing will be gone. Why then not kill my Aunt B? Oh, of course I might get caught, but I'm no fool, and besides, her doctor can be counted on to cooperate. He has an eye for the same investment, and I happen to know a good deal about his shady past. The deed can be done, professionally shall we say. There is very little chance of getting caught, and as for my conscience being guilt-ridden, I am a resourceful sort of fellow, and I will take more than sufficient comfort as I lie on a beach at Acapulco, contemplating the joy and health I have brought to so many others. Suppose Aunt B is killed, and the rest of the story comes out as told. Would I have done anything wrong? Anything immoral? One would have thought that I had, not according to utilitarianism, since what I had done has brought about the best balance between total satisfaction and frustration for all those affected by the outcome. My action is not wrong. Indeed, in killing Aunt B, the physician and I did what duty required. This same kind of argument can be repeated for all sorts of cases, illustrating time after time how the utilitarian position leads to results that impartial people find morally callous. It is wrong to kill my Aunt B in the name of bringing about the best result for others. A good end does not justify an evil means. Any adequate moral theory will have to explain why this is so. Utilitarianism fails in this respect, and so cannot be the theory we seek. What to do? Where to begin anew? The place to begin, I think, is with the utilitarian's view of the value of the individual, or rather, lack of value. In its place, suppose we consider that you and I, for example, do have value as individuals, what we'll call inherent value. To say we have such value is to say that we are something more than, something different from, mere receptacles. Moreover, to ensure that we do not pave the way for such injustices as slavery or sexual discrimination, we must believe that all who have inherent value have it equally, regardless of their sex, race, religion, birthplace, and so on. Similarly, to be discarded as irrelevant are one's talents or skills, intelligence or wealth, personality or pathology, whether one is loved and admired or despised and loathed. The genius and the disabled child, the prince and the pauper, the brain surgeon and the fruit vendor, Mother Teresa and the most unscrupulous used car salesman, all have inherent value. All possess it equally, and all have an equal right to be treated with respect, to be treated in ways that do not reduce them to the status of things, as if they existed as resources for others. My value as an individual is independent of my usefulness to you. Yours is not dependent on your usefulness to me. For either of us treat the other in ways that fail to show respect for others' independent value is to act immorally, to violate the individual's rights. Some of the rational virtues of this view, what I call the rights view, should be evident. Unlike contractarianism, for example, the rights view in principle denies the moral tolerability of any and all forms of racial, sexual or social discrimination, and unlike utilitarianism, this view in principle denies that we can justify good results by using evil means that violate an individual's rights, denies, for example, that it could be moral to kill my Aunt B to harvest beneficial consequences for others. That would be to sanction the disrespectful treatment of the individual in the name of social good, something the rights view will not, categorically will not, ever allow. The rights view, I believe, is rationally the most satisfactory moral theory. It surpasses all other theories in the degree to which it illuminates and explains the foundation of our duties to one another, the domain of human morality. On this score it has the best reasons, the best arguments on its side. Of course, if it were possible to show that only human beings are included within its scope, then a person like myself, who believes in animal rights, would be obliged to look elsewhere. But attempts to limit its scope to humans only can be shown to be rationally defective. Animals, it is true, lack many of the abilities humans possess. They can't read, do higher mathematics, build a bookcase, or make baba ganoush. Neither can many human beings, however, and yet we don't and shouldn't say that these humans therefore have less inherent value, less of a right to be treated with respect than do others. It is the similarities between those human beings who most clearly, most non-controversially have such value. The people reading this, for example, not our differences that matter most. And the really crucial, the basic similarity is simply this: we are each of us experiencing subjective life, the conscious creature having an individual welfare that has importance to us, whether our usefulness to others. We want and prefer things, believe and feel things, recall and expect things, and all these dimensions of our life, including our pleasure and pain, our enjoyment and suffering, our satisfaction and frustration, our continued existence for our untimely death, all make a difference to the quality of our life as lived, as experienced by us as individuals. As the same is true of those animals that concern us, the ones that are eaten and trapped, for example, they too must be viewed as the experienced subjects of a life, with inherent value of their own. Some there are who resist the idea that animals have inherent value. Only humans have such value, they profess. How might this narrow view be defended? Shall we say that only humans have the requisite intelligence or autonomy or reason? But there are many, many humans who fail to meet these standards, and yet are reasonably viewed as having value above and beyond their usefulness to others. Shall we claim that only humans belong to the right species, the species Homo sapiens? But this is blatant speciesism. Will it be said then that all and only humans have immortal souls? Then our opponents have their work cut out for them. I am myself not ill-disposed to the proposition that there are immortal souls. Personally, I profoundly hope I have one, but I would not want to rest my position on a controversial ethical issue on the even more controversial question about who or what has an immortal soul. That is, to dig one's hole deeper, not to climb out. Rationally, it is better to resolve moral issues without making more controversial assumptions than are needed. The question of who has inherent value is such a question, one that is resolved more rationally without the introduction of the idea of immortal souls than by its use. While perhaps some will say that animals have some inherent value, only less than we have. Once again, however, attempts to defend this view can be shown to lack rational justification. What could be the basis of having more inherent value than animals? Their lack of reason or autonomy or intellect. Only if we are willing to make the same judgments in the case of humans, who are similarly deficient, but it is not true that such humans, the disabled child for example, or the mentally ill, have less inherent value than you or I. Neither then can we rationally sustain the view that animals, like them in being the experienced subjects of a life, have less inherent value. All who have inherent value have it equally, whether they be human animals or not. Inherent value then belongs equally to those who are experienced and subjects of a life. Whether it belongs to others, to rocks and rivers, trees and glaciers, for example, we do not know and may never know, but neither do we need to know. If we are able to make the case for animal rights, we do not need to know, for example, how many people are eligible to vote in the next presidential election before we can know whether I am. Similarly, we do not need to know how many individuals have inherent value before we can know that some do. When it comes to the case for animal rights then, what we need to know is whether the animals that our culture are routinely eaten, hunted and used in our laboratories, for example, are like us in being subjects of a life. And we do know this. We do know that many, literally billions and billions of these animals are the subjects of a life in the sense explained, and so have inherent value, if we do. And since in order to arrive at the best theory of our duties to one another, we must recognise our equal inherent value as individuals, reason, not sentiment, not emotion, reason compels us to recognise the equal inherent value of these animals, and with this their equal right to be treated with respect. That very roughly is the shape and feel of the case for animal rights. Most of the details of the supporting arguments are missing. They are to be found in the book, to which I alluded earlier. Here, the details go begging, and I must in closing limit myself to 4 final points. The first is how the theory that underlies the case for animal rights shows that the animal rights movement is a part of, not antagonistic to, the human rights movement. The theory that rational grounds the rights of animals also grounds the rights of humans. Thus, those involved in the animal rights movement are partners in the struggle to secure respect for human rights. The rights of women, for example, or minorities, or workers. The animal rights movement is cut from the same moral cloth as these. Second, having set out the broad outlines of the rights view, I can now say why its implications for farming and science, among other fields, are both clear and uncompromising. In the case of the use of animals in science, the rights view is categorically abolitionist. Lab animals are not our tasters, we are not their kings. Because these animals are treated routinely, systematically, as if their value were reducibly to their usefulness to others, they are routinely, systematically treated with a lack of respect, and thus their rights are routinely, systematically violated. This is just as true when they are used in trivial, duplicative, unnecessary or unwise research, as it is when they are used in studies that hold out real promise of human benefits. We can't justify harming or killing a human being, my Aunt B for example, just for these sorts of reasons. Neither can we do so even in the case of so lowly a creature as a laboratory rat. It is not just refinement or reduction that is called for, not just larger or cleaner cages, not just more generous use of anaesthetic or the elimination of multiple surgery, not just tidying up the system, it is complete replacement. The best we can do when it comes to using animals in science is not use them. That is where our duty lies, according to the rights view. As for commercial animal agriculture, the rights view takes a similar abolitionist position. The fundamental moral wrong here is not that animals are kept in stressful close confinement or isolation, or that their pain and suffering, their needs and preferences are ignored or discounted. All of these are wrong, of course, but they are not the fundamental wrong. They are the symptoms and effects of a deeper systematic wrong that allows these animals to be viewed and treated as lacking independent value as resources for us, as indeed a renewable resource. Giving farm animals more space, more natural environments, more companions does not right the fundamental wrong, any more than giving lab animals more anaesthesia or bigger cleaner cages would right the fundamental wrong in their case. Nothing less than the total dissolution of commercial animal agriculture will do this, just as for similar reasons I won't develop at length here, morality requires nothing less than the total elimination of hunting and trapping for commercial and sporting ends. The rights views implications then, as I have said, are clear and uncompromising. My last 2 points are about philosophy, my profession. It is most obviously no substitute for political action. The words I have written here and in other places by themselves don't change a thing. It is what we do with the thoughts that the words express, our acts, our deeds, that changes things. All that philosophy can do, and all I have attempted, is to offer a vision of what our deeds should aim at, and the why, but not the how. Finally, I'm reminded of my thoughtful critic, the one mentioned earlier, who chastised me for being too cerebral. Well, cerebral I have been. Indirect duty views, utilitarianism, contractarianism, hardly the stuff deep passions are made of. I am also reminded, however, of the image another friend once set before me, the image of a ballerina, as expressive of disciplined passion. Long hours of sweat and toil, of loneliness and practice, of doubt and fatigue. Those are the discipline of her craft, but the passion is there too, the fierce drive to excel, to speak through her body, to do it right, to pierce our minds. That is the image of philosophy. I would leave you not too cerebral, but disciplined passion. Of the discipline enough has been seen. As for the passion, there are times, and these not infrequent, where tears come to my eyes when I see or read or hear of the wretched plight of animals in the hands of humans. Their pain, their suffering, their loneliness, their innocence, their death, anger, rage, pity, sorrow, disgust. The whole creation groans under the weight of the evil we humans visit upon these mute, powerless creatures. It is our hearts, not just our heads, that call for an end to it all, that demand of us that we overcome for them the habits and forces behind their systematic oppression. All great movements, it is written, go through 3 stages: ridicule, discussion, adoption. It is the realization of this 3rd stage, adoption, that requires both our passion and our discipline, our hearts and our heads. The fate of the animals is in our hands. God grant we are equal to the task.